We last gathered together as a party in October 2019. Back then, the Tories had just elected a new leader. Westminster was in meltdown. A new Prime Minister was driving through a disastrous policy agenda despite warnings of its dire economic impact. And here we are, all over again. Another spin on the Tory misery-go-round. But this time the carousel is speeding up. It took the Tories 3 long years, to realise that Boris Johnson was a disaster. With Liz Truss, it took them just 3 weeks. She caused mayhem in the markets with her decision to borrow billions of pounds to fund tax cuts for the richest, borrowing to be repaid by eye-watering austerity cuts and a raid on the incomes of the poorest. It is unconscionable.
Is Liz Truss a friend or a foe?
We're political opponents, but I've always tried to work with her predecessors and I will try to work with her. So I would like to be a friend on the basis of the areas where we can work together constructively.
And what about Keir Starmer, friend or foe?
I work very well with Keir Starmer over Brexit. I'm really disappointed that Keir Starmer has thrown in the towel on the European Union and no longer wants to take the UK or Scotland back into the European Union.
Who would you rather have as Prime Minister?
Well, that's not a difficult question. I mean, if the question to me is, would I prefer a Labour government over a Tory government? I detest the Tories and everything they stand for, so it's not difficult to answer that question.
So
yes,
you want to see Keir Starmer in
what
number
I'd say,
10?
Two things. Firstly, being better than the Tories is not a high bar to cross right now. I think we need to see more of a radical alternative from Labour rather than just a pale imitation. And if you're asking me, do I think either a Westminster Tory government or a Westminster Labour government is good enough for Scotland, then my answer to that question is no.
You're live on Sky News. Will you apologise for those comments today?
I was talking about policies and values of the Conservative Party that right now, and for much of my life, have done real damage to people in the kind of communities I grew up in, and people right now. This is a Conservative Party that was proposing to give tax cuts to the richest.
Doesn't sound like an apology, though, First Minister.
Look, we're at an SNP conference right now, and if the biggest controversy is that I don't like Conservative policies...
You said you detested the Tories, everything they stand for.
I don't like what the Tories stand for. I've spent my entire political career arguing against, standing against everything the Tories stand for. There are people right across this country of Scotland, right across the UK right now, that because of Tory policies are unable to heat their homes and feed their children. So I will not apologise for saying that I stand against those kind of policies. I think many people, certainly most people in Scotland, and I suspect growing numbers of people across the UK, would take a very similar view.
Is it a gaffe? Because it has attracted all this attention. Look, you're surrounded by cameras. You're live on TV.
Yeah, well, it's great that I'm live on TV, but I'm at an SNP conference right now. If you told me last week that the big controversy out of the SNP conference would be that I had said that I didn't much like Conservative Party policies, then I might have thought the rest of the conference must be going really well if that is the story out of the conference. I spent a political lifetime arguing against the Tories. I grew up in the west of Scotland in the 1980s. There are people that I grew up with that are still living with the damage the Tories did then, and they're doing it all over again. So, in answer to your question, will I apologise for saying that I don't support and don't much like the policies of the Conservative Party? No, I won't.
And First Minister, how do you work with the Conservatives? Because obviously David Cameron will now be the Prime Minister and you wins his election.
Our job is to stand up for Scotland against the Conservatives. I didn't want to see a Conservative government. Labour were unable to defeat the Conservatives in England. I think that makes it all the more important that we do have a strong team of SNP MPs to fight Scotland's corner and to stand up for Scotland, and that's what we plan to do.
You try and wreck the process in Westminster, though?
The damage the Tories have done to the stability and the reputation of the UK cannot be overstated. In less than a year, they have caused chaos on an industrial scale. The UK economy is in crisis. We're seeing sterling in free fall, we're seeing the cost of government borrowing ratcheting up, and we saw on Friday from the Chancellor policies that are both, in my view, morally abhorrent, racking up borrowing that future generations will have to repay, not to invest in the overall well-being of the economy or help the majority, but to make a relatively small number of already rich people even richer. That's indefensible. But these policies are also, as we're seeing right now in the reaction of the markets, fiscally reckless and are leading to a situation where interest rates and the cost of borrowing is going to soar in the UK, hitting people in mortgage repayments and other debt repayments, and we're going to see inflation continue to be a problem. This government, UK government, seems to have no idea what it is doing, the damage it is doing to the economy overall and to the living standards of the majority is deep and very, very serious. The change of Tory leader seems virtually certain to be accompanied by a shift even further to the right. And that means, of course, a shift even further away from the mainstream of Scottish opinion and values. A race to the bottom on tax, cuts to public services and support for families, more posturing over Brexit, hurting businesses and trade, abandonment of the fight against climate change, and a toxic, indeed wholly manufactured, culture war, putting equalities and human rights protections at risk. The rest of the public can see the decisions she's taken in the first few weeks of her tenure as Prime Minister have been utterly catastrophic to the economy and to people across the country who are paying the price of her decisions in higher mortgage rates and borrowing costs generally.
We came very close recently to a financial crisis, and it was only because the Bank of England stepped in that people's pensions were saved in effect. What you're proposing in an independent Scotland is to informally use sterling, to have no lender of last resort there, to step in and intervene and save people's pensions, mortgages and savings.
I'm going to come on to the substance of that question, but firstly, I would hope governments in independent Scotland wouldn't bring pension funds to the point of collapse like the UK government did 2 weeks ago. So let's take that first point. That is the fault of a UK government that chose to borrow large amounts of money to give tax cuts to the very richest in society. So bringing pension funds to the verge of collapse is not an inevitability. It was the result of choices made by a UK government that Scotland didn't vote for. We may be just a few days into this Tory leadership contest, but it is already crystal clear that the issues Scotland is focused on, tackling child poverty, supporting NHS recovery, building a fairer economy and making a just transition to net zero, will be hindered, not helped, by whoever becomes Prime Minister.